Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. My name is Nick Park, and today I want to talk about the banking crisis. Now, we've already had a banking crisis back in 2008, and that was nasty. Nobody wants another one. And so the financial world has desperately been trying to avert another banking crisis. And in Switzerland, therefore, this largest bank in Switzerland, UBS, took over the second largest bank and saved it from potential bankruptcy. That was Credit Suisse. And together, these two banks now make a super bank that employs 5% of the entire workforce of the nation of Switzerland. Think about that. Out of every 20 people that have a job in Switzerland, one of them is working for this bank. And this super bank now has a total assets of 1.7 trillion euro, which is double the national economic output of Switzerland. So the bank is twice as big as the nation in which it is located. Now, how on earth did that come about? Well, of course, Switzerland's famous for banking. I mean, probably the three things most people know Switzerland most for. One is watches, another is Toblerone chocolate, and the third one is its famous Swiss banks. Not what a lot of people don't realize is that actually came about because of Christian theology and Christian history. Way back in the 16th century, there was the great reformer John Calvin. Now, Calvin's known in theological circles for his massive book. I've got it here in 2 volumes, The Institutes of the Christian Religion, and for the theological system known as Calvinism. But he was one of the reformers, and he was based in, although he was French, he ended up based in Geneva in Switzerland. And Calvin was not just a reformer, but he was quite an innovator as well. He was quite revolutionary in some of his thinking. For example, at his time, he was unusual in that he insisted that biblical morality should apply equally to men and to women. He was a happily married man, and he thought that he should abide by biblical standards of morality just as much as his wife. That was actually very unusual in his day, whereas standards of morality were applied to women, but generally weren't to men. He was also a Republican at a time whenever most people believed in kings and God had appointed kings and the divine right of kings. Calvin believed very strongly in a republic. But probably the reason how he's affected most of our lives today is in how he treated making loans to people. You see, the Old Testament had spoken against usury, and usury was where you charged excessive interest. But by the time we get to the 16th century, the Catholic Church had interpreted this as that you should not lend money with any interest at all, which when you think about it, sort of does away with the rationale for making loans at all. Why would you loan anybody money if you weren't going to make any profit on the deal? Nobody's going to do that except for digging out a friend. And so you had businesses starting up, you had people wanting to buy houses and going through tough times, needed a bit of help, and so everybody needed loans, and yet Christians weren't allowed to make loans. Well, how could they get around this? And before Calvin, the answer was you allowed the Jews to make loans. Now, that didn't work very well because the Jews would make loans and charge interest, but then when people saw any Jewish people becoming wealthy in that way, it would give rise to anti-Semitism, and then there'd be persecution against the Jews, and they would start killing the Jews and casting the Jews out, and then wondering why their banking system collapsed. And so they had to find a way around this. And it was Calvin that basically came up with a theological justification that it was okay to make loans and to charge interest, provided certain conditions were met. And the conditions that Calvin laid down for why loans could be justified, and this would basically, many people see Calvin as being the father of capitalism for this reason, but what he laid down was this, that a loan should not exploit the poor, and a loan should benefit the borrower more than the lender. So whoever was lending the money could could charge interest and would get some benefit from it, but the benefit that the person borrowing the money received should always be greater than the benefit that the lender received. Now, actually, if that principle still applied to loans today, we wouldn't have a banking crisis. The banking crisis happen because people do exploit the poor, that they make loans at high interest to people who can't afford to pay it back, and then the whole system collapses. It's all based on greed and people wanting to make larger and larger profits. So actually, if we still followed Calvin's restrictions on loans, there wouldn't be any banking crises. But anyway, because Calvin was in Switzerland, that's where the bank started, and that's how Switzerland became the center for banking that means that today it's got a bank that's so big. Now, how does that all work out in practice? Well, it's this, is that Calvin was quite correct in that he was interpreting theology in a way that he wanted to be faithful to the word of God, but he wanted to protect the poor. And whenever any kind of belief, whether it be economic systems and political beliefs, or whether it be Christian beliefs, move away to exploiting the poor, then we are in trouble. And in that, at least, John Calvin still has something to teach us today. May God bless you today. If you have opportunity to do good to the poor, to help somebody that's in need today, please do so. You're in line with the Bible, you're in line with God, and you're in line with John Calvin too. God bless you. Join us again tomorrow for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.